All right, so we're going to take a little look into different file types. So your camera can actually record pictures in three different file types: JPEGs, TIFFs, and RAW. And they're all useful for some things and not useful for other things. So it's important to kind of understand the pros and cons, so you can make the decision um, that's best suited to what your needs are. So JPEG actually is an acronym that stands for Joint Photographic Experts Group. And this file type was created in response to a real need at the beginning of, like, when digital cameras and digital photography first started becoming more widespread, that, different brands of digital cameras used to shoot different types of files. So if you had a Canon camera that would shoot and it would save pictures as one file type, versus if you had a Polaroid or a Nikon or a Kodak or whatever other brand of digital camera. And it became really difficult to share pictures with other people. You'd have to have the same software from the camera on your computer to be able to look at the pictures. And this group kind of came together and they said, we need to standardize this. We need to make sure everyone's kind of using the same file format and the same file type so we can share our photos with each other. This was also kind of at the beginning of email. So they needed something that was going to be small, that was easy to share and easy to transfer from computer to computer. So that's how the JPEG was kind of created, and it's still probably the most common file type for pictures. What's problematic with the JPEG is that it is a small file type, which is good for sharing because you can email them and they don't take up a lot of space. But they don't have as much quality because they're so small. So it's also what's known as a lossy file type, which means that if you open and edit and save, open, edit, save, open, edit, save hundreds of times, which a professional photographer might do, it's actually going to start to degrade. You're going to start losing information the more you open, edit, and save, open, edit, save. So the file is going to kind of almost like corrode or degrade the more it's opened and edited and saved. Kind of like a piece of paper, right? If you're handing a piece of paper between like 100 people and everyone needs to collaborate on it, that piece of paper is eventually going to get kind of crumpled and ripped and torn and kind of wear down. That's kind of like what happens with a JPEG. If you're opening it, editing it, and saving it maybe 5 times, you're not going to notice any difference. But if it's something that you're doing often and often and over, it's definitely going to start to become noticeable, which is something we don't really think about. Files on a computer is kind of degrading, but it is possible. So the TIFF was created to avoid this problem. So TIFF stands for Tagged Image File Format. It's a larger file type, so they take up more space. They're a little bit more difficult to share and transfer because they are a bit bigger, but they are a lossless format, meaning that no matter how many times you open, edit, and save, they won't start degrading or disintegrating. So it's almost like if you passed a piece of paper, but it was laminated. It's not going to start breaking down, right? It's going to stay nice and strong. For that reason, the TIFF is really popular among professional photographers and graphic designers because they don't lose the quality. RAW files are kind of a whole different can of worms. So RAW files are the largest file type, and it actually is the most equivalent to what your camera is actually capturing when you hit the shutter. So with JPEGs and TIFFs, there's a little computer chip in your camera that will process the information it's taking from the real world and converting it into a photograph. So the computer in the camera kind of makes that change happen to create a JPEG or a TIFF. But in a RAW file, it actually relies on you to put that data into a computer to do the final editing. So RAW files really aren't good on their own unless you're going to open it up on a computer and do the final editing and conversion to a file type on the computer. So instead of relying on the little not so great, computer chip in the camera. You're just capturing that information and basically saving it for later. So you're going to process it on a computer. RAW files don't have a standard format. They're actually different based on camera models. So Canons, which what you guys are shooting in, will save as a CR2 file type. Nikons will save .nef. And you do have to have special software programs to be able to open RAW files. So quick video that kind of explains different file formats, kind of using some tasty looking cake as an analogy.
Most cameras can shoot JPEGs, TIFFs and RAW files. When you press the shutter button, your camera records a RAW file, which it actually then sends off to its processor to be turned into a JPEG or a TIFF. Now, JPEGs are very convenient. They're small, so you can get lots on your card. The downside with a JPEG is they're lossy. They begin to fall apart. Take this image here, for example. Now, suppose I decide to put that into the computer and then do some work on it. So to darken the sky down a bit, perhaps. Now that looks a bit better. I'm going to save it, just in case I go and mess it up the next bit of work I do. The trouble is, each time I save a JPEG, it loses some data. It starts to disintegrate at about 5 or 10 saves. Had I shot it as a TIFF file, it would be nice and stable. TIFFs are big, so they take up a lot of space, but you can save them until you're blue in the face. RAW files, on the other hand, are something completely different. So let's go and get a piece of cake. You caught me. I can buy a Victoria sponge like this from almost any corner shop anywhere in the country, and it'll be fine. But it'll be kind of lacking in character and individuality. Because it's been cooked in a factory, it'll be just the same as any other cake cooked in that factory. This is kind of what happens when your camera cooks a RAW file into an image file. It's being prepared according to a set of pre-programmed guidelines, a bit like cooking instructions. But what would happen if I could get at the original raw ingredients of that image? I could mix them up my own way and bake my own sponge and start to put my own interpretation upon it. But I'm probably just going to make a mess. Here's one somebody prepared earlier. And straight away, you can see that this is something a bit special. I can certainly smell that it is, and hopefully I'm going to taste that it is in a moment or two as well. A RAW file has all the digital ingredients necessary for you to bake your own image in the computer, which, by the way, is a considerably more powerful cooker than the processor in your camera. On their own, RAW files are not a great deal of use for anything. You've got to cook them into something usable, like a TIFF or a JPEG, before you can print and enjoy it. I know you can make image files a bit brighter, more colourful or contrasty, but in the same way that I can't add a couple more eggs and a spoonful of sugar to this sponge, that's about all you can do with it without messing it up. You could never take a JPEG like this and rebake it into this without going back to the initial raw ingredients. There's simply not enough information left in the file, and it'll begin to fall apart. Now, I'm not suggesting that you should always shoot RAW files any more than you should always bake your own cakes. There's issues of time and convenience to be thought about too. But if you do take the trouble, the results are usually well worth it. It's a goodie.
All right, so you can definitely see the difference. For your assignment, you're actually going to be shooting a small portion using a RAW file. So you will have that experience of editing straight from the RAW file to see the things that you can do that give you more ability than just shooting with a JPEG or a TIFF file. Okay. All right, so let's kind of break down what you're going to be doing with this third assignment. So like I said earlier, it does have 3 different parts. In part 1, we're going to focus just on like the basics of editing. There's going to be 4 little mini things that you're going to do that will teach you the basics of, how to adjust the size, how to crop a picture, how to adjust things like color, balance, saturation, And we'll look at two of the really useful but simple to use tools in Photoshop, the Dodge and Burn tool and the Clone Stamp tool. So that will be part one, just basics of editing. We'll spend some time each day and I'll actually demonstrate each of those techniques and tools for you in small chunks so you can kind of watch the demo and then you can go ahead and do it. Part two is going to be something a little bit more artistic and creative. You're going to be creating a kaleidoscope image using some different photos that you shoot. So I, again, will demonstrate how to do that using some of the different tools, and you'll learn a little bit about layers and kind of duplicating parts of a picture to create that. And then part three, because there are so many things that you could do with Photoshop, it's hard for me to decide what's most important and what you're going to get benefit out of. So for part three, I'm leaving it up to you. You're going to figure out something that you want to learn that might be useful for you. Maybe you do want to get into more realistic editing. Maybe you want to start taking like wedding pictures or senior pictures for someone, and you want to learn a little bit more about how to retouch pictures to look realistic. Maybe you want to do something totally different and learn how to like Photoshop your head on someone else's body, or make it look like you're posing with your favorite movie star or something like that, and do something fun and just silly. You're going to look up a tutorial and you're going to kind of execute that design that you want to make. Okay, so let's kind of break down and look at examples of each one. So for part 1A, we're going to use some of the pictures from our light painting that we did in our last kind of unit. So you're going to take your best light painting pictures, which hopefully you've already kind of set aside. I gave you time to do that in class last time. And you're going to find the best ones that you want to use. And I would probably wager to guess that they need to be cropped a little bit. There's probably a lot of extra space. Maybe we see some things from the classroom. Maybe there's just lots of dark space and we don't want to see that. We want to focus on what it is we want to take the picture of. So we're going to look at how to crop a picture to get rid of all the kind of empty dead space. We're going to look at how to adjust the size. We're going to talk a bit about resolution. And you're going to take the best light painting pictures, 2 to 4, crop them to use for that part of the assignment. So this is not a picture that was light painting, but you can kind of see what cropping can do. You know, just basically like cutting or removing part of a picture that's really not adding anything to the scene. You can see the after is a much stronger image that has better kind of overall composition. Okay. The second part of part 1, so part 1B, you're going to be shooting in a RAW file format. So this is the only part that you're going to use in RAW. So you're going to just find a picture that has really dynamic colors that uses good composition. It can be any kind of picture you want, okay? You're going to need to use your manual exposure settings to be able to shoot in a RAW file. And I will show you how to set up your camera to capture both the RAW and the JPEG file type just for that part of the assignment. You don't want to shoot the whole thing in RAW and JPEG because it's going to eat up a lot of space on your card and in your Google Drive. So just for this part, you're going to change what your camera is going to capture to get both the RAW and the JPEG file. And we're going to use a program called Polar. So in Polar, they let you work with photos to kind of like you would with unprocessed film and make lots of decisions about saturation and color balance and hue and exposure and all of this stuff. So you'll be able to use that program that's also free to kind of get exposure to different options. Okay, so just an example of what a before picture might look like and what the after picture might look like. Part 1C, we're going to look at the Dodge and Burn tool in Photoshop. So this is a really useful tool that can be kind of great for bringing in darker darks and brighter lights. So